story, blasting your ears out, telling a story, a true story, from the perspective of a woman named Lisa. None of our Lisas, just a woman named Lisa. And it's true. So she said, Tom wasn't interested in help from me or anyone else for that matter. In fact, he was under the delusion that he had his life well in hand, but the sad truth was that he was dangling dangerously over a cliff that was beckoning him to jump, and was woefully oblivious to the fact that if he fell, his family would fall with him. The news of Tom's criminal investigation was the final blow to our marriage. I filed for divorce, but remained actively supportive for the sake of our son. Needless to say, this turn of events was a rude awakening for a man who had thought he was on the top of his game. When weeks of waiting for the grand jury to bring indictments turned into months, we began to live our lives in an excruciating state of limbo. When would the blade fall and how deep would it cut? How would we survive this nightmare? Many white-collar families agree that the waiting is the hardest part. That is, until the next hardest part comes along. Now, this was an interview with a woman named Lisa Lawler, whose husband had embezzled $2.5 million from a Massachusetts healthcare company not too long ago. Have you ever wondered how the Toms of our world get to that place? They wake up and suddenly they have to stand trial for things they thought weren't that bad. We talk a lot about money here at UCC Medfield, mainly around the stewardship season, which is in the fall for us. We talk about how we give the money that we receive, the money that we earn. But we don't often talk about how we earn it. How do we get the money that we give? Proverbs, the Old Testament book that we're walking through in a way, very specifically talks about money a lot. And I wondered if you all had an idea why. Why would Proverbs, a book that teaches us about wisdom, talk about money? It's very tempting. Okay. You want to say more? To worship money or to value money. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything about why money and why we talk about money with wisdom? We can really screw it up. I mean, we can make big mistakes with money that have huge consequences for the rest of our lives. Money is a pretty important topic if we want to live life well. Can I get a head nod? Okay. We can get into trouble pretty fast with money. Proverbs has a lot to say about money, of course. It has even more to say about stewardship, especially if I find the page I needed. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we spend money as a church, because it talks about how to acquire money, but it also talks about the best way to spend money. And if you read Proverbs and you pull out all of the passages about money, which is what I did, it was fascinating. I'd love to help you do that. That's another thing. But it says that the best way to spend our wealth is to give it to those who don't have it. And so I was thinking about, wouldn't it be good for you to know that our church tries to do that? That a big portion of our budget, and it's our goal that even a bigger portion of our budget would be dedicated to those who need more resources. I wanted you to know that last year in 2018, $80,000, we gave $80,000 towards folks who need more resources, who are getting on their feet, who needed furniture. We gave $21,000 to New Life last year. we want to give more. We gave $15,000 to Place of Promise, which is a place in Lowell where people go to have their lives transformed by God. These are people with addiction issues, and they go there to start over. And we also gave $11,000 to Flying Kites, which is an organization that started in Medfield that is dedicated to making schools in Kenya and beyond, so that kids who don't have access to education have access. And we have a bias towards these organizations that we have close relationships with. Many of you know we have a very close relationship with New Life. We have a close relationship with Place of Promise. One of our own works there as a nurse and as a minister. And we have one of our own working at Flying Kites also. So there's a lot more organizations than that. Those alone don't add up to 80,000. But I want you to know that the mission team takes this seriously. They know that I want to say one of the best places to spend our money, but that's not really what Proverbs says. This is really the best way to spend your money is on the poor. And so we are trying to do that. There's a few Proverbs. I wish I could read you all these relevant Proverbs. There's so many. But one of them says, if you help the poor, you're lending to the Lord, and God will repay you. Another says, some people are always greedy for more, but the godly love to give. It's just a posture. It's a way that, it's a goal that we have. We want to give. It's a way we want to be. So today's topic is basically a wise person's guide to getting richer and how not to be Lisa's husband. Proverbs lists 4 ways to attain riches and 5 ways that you can become rich but lose your soul. And as Phil said last week, it all starts with wisdom. That's the first way. And being wise isn't about having a lot of knowledge. Being wise is about placing everything within a bigger picture, understanding that we are part of a whole, that our story of our finite life on earth is not all that there is, that actually we belong to a much larger story than just our own, that there's an eternal story going on. That's where wisdom begins. The scriptures say that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And that's not to say an unhealthy fear where we're trembling and we don't feel like we can come to God and we can't have a relationship with God, but an understanding that God is God and I am not. That's what it means to have a healthy fear of the Lord. A part of that is when we come to the scriptures, we try to let the scriptures speak to us. We don't put into the scriptures what we believe is true. We seek understanding from the scriptures. I'm going to mess this quote up, but there's a quote that says, you know that you have made God in your own image when God likes all the same things you like. We don't get to make up who God is. We have to understand that God is already God. God created us. We don't create God. So the first is to walk in wisdom. The second way to acquire money is through diligence. The Proverbs speak about ants. They use the example of ants. Ants work all summer long so that they have what they need by the fall. I don't like diligence. It sounds like hard work, and that's exactly what it is. Diligence, there's a definition that says, is having or showing care and conscientiousness for one's work or duties. I mean, I think I'm from the get-rich-quick generation. Maybe everybody feels that way, but that's what appeals most to me. Some of you are of retirement age, and sometimes I'm in conversations with you. And so you're talking about your retirement, and it might be next year, it might be 3 years, and I'm like, is there any way I can do this in 3 years? But no, diligence is required of all of us. And God values it, so it's great. Here's a few Proverbs. The plans of the diligent will surely lead to abundance, and those who are attentive to a matter will prosper. Now, here's an aside about Proverbs. Proverbs are not promises. We can't read the book of Proverbs and say, you know what, I am going to own that, and if I know that if I'm diligent, I will have abundance. That's not how Proverbs works. My favorite proverb is, God grants sleep to those he loves. So, you can imagine this little deal I'm trying to make with God, especially with 3 young children. I'm like, God, if you love me, they will sleep through the night. If you love, but that's not how Proverbs works. They're not promises. They are generalities that are generally true. And you get what I'm saying? They're generalities. That one. I keep wanting to make this deal, but we're still working on it. So these first 2 wealth tools, being wise about money, understanding the bigger picture, and also being diligent, are the same sorts of things you might hear if you go to a financial planner. Nobody's going to disagree with those things. The next 2 are a little outside the box. The next one especially, giving. Proverbs say, if you give, you will get, which sounds ridiculous. Here's one. It says, give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. After worship today, I'm going to do a sermon deep dive, and that's what I want to explore together. Is that true? Have you experienced that? I want to know. I suspect it's true, actually. I'm going to tell you a story. I have a really good friend. Her name's Cindy, and her husband's name is Matt. And Matt has severe anxiety and depression, so severe that he's been on disability for years, and he's not taking advantage of the system. He's truly disabled. And my friend Cindy worked at Whirlpool. They just restructured, and she lost her job about a year ago. And Matt, I don't know what he makes for disability, but when he qualified, he wasn't really working much, so I'm guessing that's not that big. Anyway, these people love Jesus. And Cindy had a nice severance package, and she wanted to use some of those months to really be home with her kids. She has 3 kids under 10. And so she had a few months she was home, and she was really trying to think about what she wanted to do with her life. She didn't want to just get another job. And so she went through counseling to try to figure that out. And it came to Christmas. It was this past Christmas. And Cindy and Matt had always believed in giving a percentage of their income to their church, but they had withheld that during this time of instability. And I don't know who started the conversation, either Cindy or Matt, but they kind of said to each other, look, a job's not coming, but we've got this left. We've got this money left. It was, I think, a percentage of her severance that they had sort of set aside that they didn't want to spend on their own stuff. And they said, we're going to give this to God. So they did. That Christmas, this past Christmas, they gave it to God. And we were talking in January, and I just had a hunch. Cindy had called to tell me not only did she get a new job, but she was pregnant again with their 4th, and she was rejoicing. And I just wanted to know, I had a sense I would learn something if I asked her, Cindy, how'd you guys do it? How'd you make it work with finances? And did you wind up giving to God? And so she told me the story about, Karen, we were really nervous, but we felt God was calling us to give. And they did. And that's when the interview came. The next week, she had a call for the interview, and the following week, she got the job. I mean, some of these things, you just got to wonder. It's like, God doesn't send down like rubber stamps and say, yes, I did this, pay attention, you stupid head, But it makes you wonder. The timing is uncanny. So that's one story about Give freely and become more wealthy. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. But I bet if I were to ask in this room for stories, I'd get more, a lot more. So that's one that your financial planner may not share with you, that if you give, you will get. It's sort of a general principle. It's kind of how Proverbs work. And then the fourth one is righteousness. And righteousness is a churchy word. It just means right living that begins by trusting in God. And there's Proverbs about whatever the righteous person pursues ends in good. It's as if the righteous are trees that produce good things, bearing fruit and a true reward. This one I think is a little comical with this translation. Trust in your money and down you go. But the godly flourish like leaves in spring. So you just get this sense that, going about wealth in a righteous way, in a right way, actually can produce fruit. Now, those are the 4 ways to acquire wealth. I mean, it's not like, I get that these are sort of abstract things. And then I told you I'd tell you 5 ways that you could wind up being like Tom. But before I get to that, I want to say that all of these 5 ways seem to me to fit under a bit of an umbrella of pride. And there's a proverb about pride. And what's interesting, of course, about pride is that it's sort of the opposite of the fear of the Lord. Pride is when we make ourselves our own God, which is pretty much the opposite of the fear of the Lord. And there's a proverb you may have heard before. It says, pride goes before destruction, or pride goes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And then the Message says, first pride, then a crash. The bigger the ego, the harder the fall. Okay? So that sort of sums up all of these. But the Proverbs talk specifically about cutting corners, about robbery, and robbery is taking what we did not work for at the expense of those who did. So I was thinking about my confirmation students. I shared a story with them about when I was in high school and I cheated on a test. Cheating is robbery. It fits in there pretty well. Taking what we did not work for at the expense of those who did. Aggressive oppression, deceit, and getting rich quickly. Wealth goes as quickly as it comes, some of the Proverbs say. And we know that from many stories of lottery winners. Money may be featured so much in Proverbs because the writers knew what Jesus knew. Money is probably the easiest way for us to lose our souls. No one knew this better than Jesus. The rich young ruler himself came to Jesus. He basically said to Jesus, I've done it all right, Jesus. I've kept the commandments. He says, I've got those things, righteousness, and I have diligence, and I have some wisdom. What else do I need to do to inherit eternal life? But Jesus captured the one thing he didn't have: generosity. He said, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come follow me. Honestly, that sounds like the least wise advice to give anyone. Can you imagine saying to someone, especially like a young person, go sell everything you have and then come follow me? I mean, it feels like a setup for a mess of a life, does it not? I mean, it seems extremely unwise to me. But Jesus knew this was the one thing, right? He had so many other things going for him. But he made money his ultimate. He made money his God. Wisdom, diligence, giving, and righteousness. That sounds like a lot like Jesus. The truth is that the only way the rich person is going to enter the kingdom of heaven was through the same door any of us can. Wisdom, diligence, giving, and righteousness, which we receive when we let Jesus transform our lives. That's the only way. Jesus knew that that rich young ruler had to be transformed yet. He was doing all the right things, but he hadn't been transformed. He hadn't learned to trust something more than himself. He hadn't learned to trust God yet. Then Peter said to him, okay, so then later in this passage, the same passage, the disciples are there. So the young ruler leaves because he's like, you know what, Jesus, you're asking too much. I don't want to be transformed right now. So he leaves and the disciples are still there. And the disciples are saying, you know what, Jesus, we did leave everything. We have been transformed by you, and we are being transformed by you. And Jesus points them to the bigger picture. This is what he says. And this, unlike the Proverbs, is a promise. Jesus said, I assure you that when the world is made new and the Son of Man sits upon his glorious throne, you who have been my followers will also sit with me. Everyone who has given up something, houses, brothers, sisters, children, or property for my sake will receive 100 times as much in return and will inherit eternal life. But many who are the greatest now will be the least important then, and those who seem least important now will be the greatest then. Jesus calls us to the big picture. There's a quote by a missionary that some of you have heard before. And it goes like this. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to save what he cannot lose. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to save what he cannot lose. That is wisdom. May God journey with us. Amen.